This video, we will be discussing Project Looking Glass. I believe that the information is something that the chosen should be familiar with. If you are not familiar with the Project Looking Glass, now this is considered mythology, but yet someone testified in regards to this, a whistleblower. It was believed, or it was testified that there are powers that be that fear the awakening, where allegedly hidden power groups, military intelligence planners, elite policy circles, and people benefiting from mass public unawareness. And not necessarily, it's not one person, but again, it's these groups. And the story goes or frames this as a class of leadership that wanted to see which future events would keep populations manageable. And I speak in regards to this in multiple videos. When you are no longer predictable, it is hard to manage you. And that happens when a chosen has quite a few negative experiences and they begin to learn because they can see a pattern and they become aware of what is taking place along with their sensitivities. The gifts that they're born with helps them see behind and beneath what is not being said or what is being done. Now, the alleged fear was not simply that people would wake up spiritually. It was that people would stop reacting predictably. And once people could no longer be managed through fear or crisis or division or scarcity and controlled stories or narratives, the alleged device became less useful. Let's speak on what did it consist of. In the conspiracy version, and it's the testified version, whistleblower version. Now, this was described as a machine or device, but not a time travel machine where someone physically walks into the past or the future. It was described more like a future viewing system that supposedly showed possible timelines or probability paths. And as I began to read up on this, it solidifies just how much people will strongly go against to apply pressure to be an op against the chosen. There are individuals that, in fact, actually need to make sure that they can remain in power. But let me continue. One summary of the project describes it as using counter-rotating mercury plasma chambers. But you don't have to forget all that, but it's going to make sense. And this was done to create a kind of space-time distortion lens for future viewing. That is an allegation. It's not verified technology, but this is what was reported or testified to. And this obsession that the elites have, or those in power have, with managing others and seeing into the future, this is exactly why when I spoke of Egypt, when I gave the video on Egypt, this is why the Egyptians protect certain knowledge, because everyone can't handle it. They will begin to use it for something else. But someone learned that there's a possibility that their past, their timelines, that can be altered to their advantage. So you have all of these groups that are working together to see if this can be done to the masses in order for them to keep everyone asleep in a state of crisis and confusion and wars and division, and also in scarcity, not having enough, being cut off by the government, right? Panicking. If you keep an individual in that state, they cannot walk into their power. They can't come into their power. Most cannot, because they are in a state of panic, in crisis, and chronic stress. Some retellings of this story says it worked like this. Operators would feed in a question, a scenario, or event pathway, and the system would show probable outcomes. To me, it's AI, right? But they were using it back in the early 2000s. In other words, not what will happen no matter what, but they fed, if this choice is made, where does it lead? And when they're able to find the result that they want, that is most probable, then that's what they'll do. If they need to start a war, they'll start a war. If they need to create panic, they'll create panic. Because the key is to not allow the masses, do not give them time to think. Don't leave them to their own consciousness. Let's keep them out of their consciousness. Let's keep them controlled. Now, and because they wanted to know where it would lead once a choice is made, that is why people connected to controlled outcomes, because the alleged purpose was not passive viewing. It was scenario testing. How would they respond? If you have an op, and when I first started my channel, a month or so into it, I began to speak on this. And when I say they study you, that's what this is. They're studying the masses, right? Along with considering, what if we do this to them? What do you think they'll do? Would there be any backlash? What if we have them fired? What if we affect their health? What if we create a death? What if we create a war and take their children? Will that give us power simply because we can predict that they'll be in a state of chaos? And when they're in a state of chaos, they will allow us to have control. They'll see us as the savior, but we created the problem. Because we feel confident that they're going to respond this way. So we'll be ready for the reaction. The most common claims say that it involved a viewing device or a portal-like system that displayed probable future events. Operators or trained personnel who interpreted what appeared. Scenario modeling, where leadership allegedly tested different decisions. Some people are not so bright after all. And see, a timeline convergence problem, where many possible paths supposedly began leading to the same unavoidable turning point. The famous 2012 claim says the machine allegedly became less useful because the possible futures converged around December 21st, 2012. Some modern articles retell this as timeline convergence. So again, there's information where you can research. And so while also noting that the expected catastrophes did not occur. This is also a real world confusion. Operating Looking Glass was a documented U.S. airborne command and control mission. Essentially, a flying backup command post during the Cold War. Wired, which is a news publication, described it as a flying duplicate of military command systems that was tied to nuclear command continuity, not a future viewing machine. So that is what they needed us to believe. But allegedly, Project Looking Glass was a machine that was used to view probable futures. Okay, it didn't physically travel through time as far as we know or as being reported. But we do know through CERN that the elites do, as well as Musk, they do tamper with portals. The people who feared the awakening were described as hidden leadership groups, hidden, who wanted populations to remain predictable. The outcomes they allegedly tried to control were wars, disclosure, what the public believed, political order, economic fear, and spiritual awakening. Although it is said that they're denying that they were trying to tamper with spiritual awakening. But no public evidence proves that such a future viewing device existed. But again, it wasn't necessarily a device, it was a system where probabilities were fed to it due to understanding timelines. So they wanted to see if they can manipulate timelines. When people know who you are and what you're capable of, and they fear that they may someday somehow lose control, they may try to manipulate your path to cause delays, to cause you to be distracted, to have to look elsewhere, to consistently have to deal with crisis after crisis. And that way, you really can't make any progress. The machine was not the deepest part of the story. The fear was. They were afraid. They were afraid of individuals awakening. Because if the story is true, even symbolically, then the leaders were not afraid of disaster. They were afraid of people becoming impossible to guide through fear. They would be unable or less able to intimidate. Project Looking Glass was a real but is now inactive, a Sun Microsystems 3D desktop environment project from the early 2000s. It was software that was meant to make computer windows appear and move in a 3D space. In internet and alternative history circles, Project Looking Glass usually refers to an alleged secret device or program that could supposedly see possible futures and alternate timelines or hidden events. Now, this version is commonly tied to claims about classified programs such as timeline viewing or remote viewing, 2012 theories, and whistleblower stories as well. The main issue is that this version has not been verified with public evidence, meaning that it has not been disclosed to the public. Searches connect the idea mostly to claims from figures and to a more broader remote viewing mythology or a false universe. Now, the closest documented government program people often connect it to is the United States Stargate Project, which studied remote viewing and psychic phenomena for intelligence purposes from the 1970s until it was closed in 1995. The CIA's later review conclude remote viewing was not proven useful as an intelligence method. You can research that. I was able to extract information from Wikipedia. Project Looking Glass, for me, it represents the human obsession with seeing ahead before character is ready to handle what it sees. It is the forbidden desire to look beyond time, not for wisdom. And that's why Egypt is so relevant to the videos, because Egypt taught wisdom. With all the knowledge that they had, they made it useful to create a civilized society, to advance society in a way that did not cause harm. Some knowledge does not destroy people because it is false. It destroys people because they touch it without spiritual maturity. And this is even when there's looking to the stars. This is why many religious, organized religions, and even spiritual societies, right? They are careful and they feel the best way to deal with individuals who desire to see the future before God reveals it is to just say that it is demonic, because there are many that don't operate with morals. That's why the chosen are not noticed. They're considered weak, easy to incite, even though they may appear, or they appear that it's something to them, right? But no one knows who you are, because it may change how you're perceived, and you may not know who's for you or who's against you. And because no one knows who you are or what you were born with, they feel that you're easy game. They fear no consequences. And although that's painful, it's hurtful, but it spares you. And with the Project Looking Glass, the claim is that different possible timelines or paths were viewed, outcomes, and that many of them supposedly converged in 2012, as though everyone who were all whom were awakening, it was being done. The awakening was a mass scale, where in 2012 this machine was unable to predict any outcomes. The software was unable to continue providing probabilities, because something happened around December 21st, 2012, where after or on that date, the awakening began, the shift began. And so it is alleged that after 2012, more people are awakening, and it's less likely that the machine can provide probable outcomes, because an awakened person or society or civilization that is awakened cannot be predicted. So the machine didn't have any use. But it's funny that the machine would only be able to provide different possibilities up to 2012. Past 2012, it was unable to look at possible futures, because the outcomes became harder to separate, as though time was moving toward one unavoidable turning point. The common storyline usually says, before 2012, the leaders were allegedly trying to use the device to choose or control outcomes. Around 2012, the timelines supposedly collapsed into one main path. After 2012, the machine allegedly became less useful, because the future could no longer be manipulated the same way. So it is believed that the awakening began in 2012. What is connected to at this moment, I don't know. Project Looking Glass did not see one fixed year by year calendar. It supposedly saw probability paths. They called the path a timeline. The terrifying claim was not here is every year. The terrifying claim was, no matter which path was chosen, humanity kept arriving at a point where hidden control lost its advantage. The obsession was never just seeing the future. It was controlling the future before people woke up. But a spiritual question that I would like to ask is, what happens when power gets access to tomorrow, but the character never catches up? In this story, the leaders were supposedly not trying to control small personal outcomes. No, the claim is that they wanted to control large timeline outcomes. They wanted to control the path of the masses. But it would be the kind that would shape how an entire population would think, react, vote, obey, fear, resist, or awaken. In the Project Looking Glass story, alternate timelines mean possible future paths, not one fixed movie of tomorrow. Right? It's like an individual that has the possibility to do whatever it is they wish, right? They have different possible future paths. It's not just one that is fixed. The claim is that the device could allegedly show probable outcomes based on different choices. So if a person chooses to go to medical school, or an individual chooses to go into the military, to join the military, it was based on different choices, right? It's like create a crisis here and delay a disclosure there. Start a conflict here, push a public story there, and then observe where the path leads. That is why reaction works against you. Silence doesn't. And when hidden events, that it was mentioned hidden events, hiding events from people, and that usually means events that the public would not know were being guided, delayed, provoked, or even used. It parallels the life of the chosen. In the story, those events were not an accident. They were the pressure points of civilization, such as wars, creating financial fears, public panic, spiritual awakening, and disclosure of hidden knowledge, political uprisings, media stories, health crisis, technological releases, and moments when people either comply or break free from the script being handed to them. So that line, the line of no matter which path is chosen, that people kept arriving at a point where hidden control lost its advantage. People no longer, they can see through the pressure, the financial fears, the need to create health crisis. See, when it says that the hidden control, those powers that be, because it's saying that, well, hidden control lost its advantage. This means that the alleged device may have shown many different roads, right? But the roads kept ending in the same kind of result. And people will begin to notice patterns. People will stop trusting official stories without question. TikTok does this quite well. And so people start comparing notes. People start questioning institutions, media narratives, religious control, financial dependency, political theater, and spiritual suppression. The awakening feared in the story, or in this case, was not just people becoming mystical, right? It was people becoming harder to manage, because everyone may not become spiritual, but they may begin to see, because they are comparing notes. Social media made it where individuals can collaborate and or compare notes, fact check, put the information out. And it creates an environment where individuals are harder to scare. It's harder to shame them, and it's harder to divide them. It is harder to feed them half-truths, harder to convince that survival requires obedience to systems that benefit from confusion. In the Project Looking Glass story, the alternate timelines allegedly show that different strategies could delay awakening. It could redirect it, it could confuse it, or it can divide it, but it could not fully stop it. Once you set out on your spiritual journey, they can redirect you, have you looking over here and there, and confuse you and divide you in your relationships, but they can't stop you. Spirituality and awakening is a personal experience. One path may have used fear. Another path or outcome may have used entertainment. Okay, we'll keep them entertained. What will be the outcome? Another may use war. Another may create economic instability. And another may use false disclosure, meaning that they're telling you that they're disclosing something, but in fact, it is a half-truth. They are not disclosing everything or what needs to be done. It's just give them enough to get them quiet. But the alleged final problem remained the same. Once enough people see the pattern, control will lose its invisibility. Those in power. I'll get into that. But I want to continue. Control is most powerful when people do not know that it is operating. Once people see the pattern, the spell breaks. And it's not because every person becomes perfect, but because the old methods no longer work the same way. That is why suppression of the chosen is done. Suppression of materials. I can see why. I digress. The Project Looking Glass centers heavily on the idea of timeline convergence, especially around December 21st, 2012, where some retellings claim the device could no longer produce useful future data beyond that point. Again, that is an allegation, not verified evidence, but it was testified to a whistleblower. But symbolically, it means the future stopped being something hidden leadership could easily steer. Project Looking Glass allegedly did not reveal one future. It revealed a terrifying limit. Every controlled path eventually led to people seeing too much, questioning too much, and becoming too spiritually awake to be managed the old way. The hidden event was not one war or one date or one disaster. The hidden event was mass awakening itself. People finally started seeing it. Control is strongest when it looks normal. It does not always arrive as force. Sometimes it arrives as a trend, a headline, a repeated fear, a social rule, a public shame cycle, a crisis that tells everyone what to think before anyone has time to ask what really happened. When control is invisible, people think their reactions are their own. Again, that is why when I make reference to how the chosen can enter a room and all of a sudden the individuals define you. They don't like you. Your presence makes them uneasy. But what it is, they're being influenced by something they cannot see to make them react. And people were believing that they are afraid because they choose fear. They believe they are divided because division is natural. They believe they are exhausted because life is just difficult. They believe they are confused because they are not smart enough to understand what is happening, and that is a lie straight from hell. You do not need a PhD to understand what is happening. The problem is they make it look normal. And when you bring up, your spirit gives you a question, you're shut down. Like, what? Where did that come from? Oh, you're thinking that you're putting too much into it. But you don't continue to dig on your own or to sit back and watch so that you can understand what is happening. Remember, what it is that you may sense may not be understood by those around you. So we can't allow what others do not understand to determine our actions. They don't mean any harm. They just don't understand because they don't see what we see. They don't have access to certain gifts or coverings. They're not on assignment. But when control loses its ability to remain invisible, people will say, wait, why does every crisis lead me toward the same kind of obedience? Why does every public story demand an emotional reaction before the facts are complete? Why am I always being pushed to hate, panic, consume, compare, or even distrust? That is when the hidden hand stops being hidden. Control will lose its invisibility when the chosen stop reacting and start noticing. The system did not lose power because it became weak. It lost power because it became visible. People were able to see the pattern. And once the pattern is seen, the old spell could no longer dress itself as normal life. The real collapse was not in the machine, it was in the mask. Dorothy and the Yellow Brick Road should take on a different meaning for you. The Matrix and many other movies that they were using the script just to get us talking. Sometimes the actual producers and writers and directors were whistleblowing through movies. The moment people such as yourself see the patterns of life in life and in your experience, control will lose the one thing it depends on most: being mistaken for reality. Control will lose its invisibility because God allows the veil to tear. What once operated behind confusion has to stand in the open. And once it stands in the open, the chosen will finally name what has been naming them. Thank you for visiting my channel, and may your soul be blessed. Stay covered, stay conscious, and stay undefeated. And I'll see you on the next one, guys. Bye.